hold questions until particular points in the presentation or pop them in the chat?
I don't mind if you interrupt me. I'm fine with that.
Okay, cool.
That's cool. Rather than me keeping an eye on the chat, it's probably easier for me, to be honest. And yeah. All right. Thanks. I love those little thumbs up. Thanks, Laura. You can thumbs up me as much as you like. It's very friendly. Okay, everybody. Welcome to our little, I guess, knowledge transfer from our project with the Commonwealth Bank of Australia that I'm presenting today. As I said, it's probably going to take, hopefully not, it certainly won't take more than 90 minutes. It will take less than 90 minutes, and I'm leaving some time for discussion in that as well. So before I commence, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all meeting virtually, wherever you are. I know we're all around the country, and I'd like to pay respect to elders past and present, and to Aboriginal elders of all the other communities who may be here today or may see this at some point. So thank you. Okay, so today we will review and discuss some of the key points from the project and have a little think about how this information could be used by Women's Health Eastern going forward. So the CBA project, basically, I know everybody's going to have different amounts of knowledge of this because it's been a little bit flying under the radar, this project. Basically, it was a result of a partnership that really formed through the Speaking Out program. And so we were given some funding to continue some of the work Speaking Out was doing to assist in the Good Shepherd, with the Good Shepherd program, which I'll talk about in a moment. And another part of the funding was to produce 6 to 8 fact sheets, this is from their project description, for the bank's intranet and website to support its domestic and financial abuse education campaign. Now, what you can see on this slide, this background picture here is the page where they now keep most of that information. So that's changed since the beginning of the project. They now have an even stronger presence. So you can see there, this is the top of the page. This part of the page, partnering with experts and in particular build your knowledge. This is where we believe the fact sheets will appear. That is likely to change. The banks still are saying that they will potentially use excerpts from the fact sheets for specific purposes, like, you know, if they do some promotion with Mamma Mia, they might pull something out. And they may also use some of it on their intranet, and that's changed a lot during the project where exactly things were going to live, but that's been fine. So really the, I guess the interest in terms of financial abuse for the bank is in response to the Banking Royal Commission. And interestingly, I think they've really responded well to that. I don't know because I haven't looked at other banks' approaches, but they're certainly providing a lot now. They have trained support staff. I believe they've trained around 30 people who are located here in Victoria. The people that we've been working with are in Sydney. And those staff are in their sort of access, inclusion, financial hardship area. And they work directly with members of the community who are usually, I assume, banking customers who ring up and may have some issues. And oftentimes that will involve financial abuse. So there's not a lot of data specifically on financial abuse as a form of family violence, but we know that from women reporting experiencing family violence, between 78 and 99% will have experienced financial abuse depending on the particular research. And just a point on the research that I'll be referring to, I'm just going to be talking about it. I won't necessarily refer to where it is, but I will explain to you where a lot of this information is located. So definition and I'm going to use the Commonwealth Bank's definition of financial abuse. So financial abuse is a serious form of domestic and family violence that occurs when an abuser uses money and resources as a means to gain power and to control their partner or family member. It occurs in many different forms and it can affect anyone. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 13 men have experienced at least one incident of violence by an intimate partner. In fact, research suggests up to 90% of people who seek help for domestic and family violence are also affected by financial abuse, and I gave you those other figures as well. The bank has recently commissioned a survey that specifically on community attitudes to financial abuse, and they found that around 26% of people had experience of financial abuse, either directly themselves or through contact with somebody else. Types of behaviours in financial abuse: destroying property, monitoring a woman's movements and bank accounts, denying access to funds. Now, for women with a disability, financial abuse can occur through guardianship or trustee arrangements, coercing women to hand over money from their own savings, preventing or sabotaging employment. For women with a disability, it could be forcing them to work, taking out loans in a woman's name without knowledge or forcing consent. This is something that the bank's working a lot more around, is really checking in on when joint accounts or loans are coming up. Abuse and threats. Now, the bank has, the Commonwealth Bank actually were first to kind of cotton on to the fact that there were abusive messages being relayed in transaction lines of accounts. So it could be a payment from an ex-partner, you know, with for a dollar, a transfer of $1, where they would use that as an opportunity to threaten their partner. But this was also occurring between, it wasn't all intimate partner, it was, you know, across the board, different people doing this. It could also be giving an allowance for a woman to maintain a house and her children, but really nothing for her. It could be the abuse of buying expensive items or things that they want while the woman's unable to access funds. And it could be gaslighting women about their ability to manage funds or anything else that undermines their confidence. Sometimes it will show up as separation or divorce, as hidden debts, and certainly hiding assets in a divorce, and making it difficult for a woman to access her partner's super, which she's entitled to and will often be bigger. So the CBA have trained their support staff. They also have their next chapter response, which is basically a program. I guess it's going forward what they'll be doing in the next chapter of their work in family abuse, financial abuse. And they are working with Good Shepherd and financing them to run a financial counselling service for women experiencing financial abuse. They don't have to be bank customers. So that's where a lot of their work's gone. And my understanding is that our Speaking Out advocates helped to develop that. Okay, so the fact sheets themselves. So these first 3 that you see, we kind of came up with as the Life Stage series. Now, who knows if these names will stay or not. So a financial independence, a guide for young women, a guide for women during the parenting years, which is sort of like mid-20s to 40s, a guide for women approaching retirement, which, you know, would be 50s and on. So a guide for young women tended to be around, we're looking sort of at 18 to around mid to like 20s. So the process has I suppose, been a process of compromising to make sure that it's something that the bank is happy with and will use. So in that process, we've probably cut down a fair bit on the contextual information and amped up the tips and resources section of each fact sheet. There's also a fact sheet on women and super. There is a fact sheet that is on draft that will, I hope to God, be finalised today on women with disabilities and financial abuse. That one is a bit of a race, and we have had some limited input from Women with Disabilities Victoria and Women with Disabilities Australia for that. There were 2 others that we had involvement with. So the Impact of Coronavirus on Domestic Violence is an actual brochure guide thing that lives on their website now, and we reviewed that and provided some input. And then Women as Carers and Women in Care, and they had a financial abuse kind of flavour. That one actually ended up being shelved. So that was material written at the beginning of the project specifically for another booklet they were working on, which was really around trusteeship and that kind of thing. They've ended up shelving that. So the carers information they may use, but it's not in a form at the moment where it's easy to do that, or, you know, it's not in its complete form. So I think that's probably enough about the process of how we went about developing it. But it was a lot of to and fro's and a few people editing until they finally, probably in the last month, came up with an editor who got to work at looking at the fact sheets, and we understood exactly where they were going to go on the website. I think Women in Super may still sit possibly on their intranet and not go out. They have let us know that we will be able to, they will obviously let Christine know when and where material gets used, so she'll be able to highlight that when it happens. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about financial literacy, even though that wasn't specifically a focus in and of itself. It certainly was, it came up constantly in writing the fact sheets. So you can see there is the definition of financial literacy, or one of the many of them. And interestingly, Australia is in the top 10% of OECD countries for financial literacy, but 45% of Australians are financially illiterate, according to a standard test. So one of the reasons that this is so critical is that increasingly, and particularly at a younger age, we're being expected to deal with financial concepts and financial products. You need to make choices about mobile phones fairly, you know, I mean, I know parents help, but the young people, they're getting into mobile phone contracts earlier, and they need to understand what all that means. And really that's, I think, one of the things that's coming to the crisis point at the moment with COVID is there's a realisation that maybe people don't have enough of an understanding generally around the financial world and how it works to be able to do the best thing they can for themselves. So there are reasons why that is, and we'll be looking at that at the moment. But I thought it would be fun, and this is just a play-at-home thing, to actually look at the survey where these standard questions are used. And there's 5 standard financial literacy questions. So I thought what I would do is I'll actually put them up one by one, and you can have a go. We're not going to discuss this. You do not have to reveal how many you get right. But it's they appear in the Hilda survey, which you're probably all aware of. It's the Household Income and Labour Dynamics in Australia survey. And the first question is, suppose you put $100 into a no-fee savings account with a guaranteed interest rate of 2% a year. You don't make any further payments. You don't withdraw any money. How much would be in the account at the end of the first year once that interest payment is made? I'll leave all the questions up, so I'll give you a few minutes at the end to catch up if you're still doing them. Now, imagine that the interest rate on your savings account was 1% per year and inflation was 2% per year. After 1 year, would you be able to buy more than today, exactly the same as today, or less than today? Question 3, buying shares in a single company usually provides a safer return than buying shares in a number of different companies. True or false? Question 4, an investment with a high return is likely to be high risk. Suppose by the year, and it says 2020 because this was used in 2018. So let's say, suppose by the year 2022, your income has doubled. but the prices of all the things you buy has also doubled. In 2022, will you be able to buy more than today, exactly the same as today, or less than today with your income? So, does anybody need more time, or will I just hit you with the answers? Give me a thumbs up if you're all right. Yeah, Laura's good. Okay, I think we'll go ahead. So the answers to the questions are, number one, answer is $102. Number two, the answer is less than you have. Number three, the answer is false. Buying shares in a single company is not a safer option. Question four, the answer is true. It is likely to be high risk. And the final question, the answer is it's exactly the same. So again, no need to tell anybody anything about that. It's just for you really to see the questions that all of this data is created from. I like that. Finally, Year 12 economics coming in handy. All right, so.
Can I just ask, Annette, like the questions are quite interesting in terms of testing people's financial literacy, because one of the articles that I read was that women have less information about investment and some of these concepts, but tend to be better at basic saving and daily budgeting. Yes. So I think this is a really interesting way of assessing financial literacy. It must have like some limitations on it, but yeah, it's really interesting.
Everything you said is 100% correct, Laura. There's probably a gendered aspect to this test that needs looking at as well, but it is the current measure that's used in different forms. Sometimes there's only 3 of the 5 questions asked, but in Hilda it's all 5. So we'll have a look at the results for 2018. So the percentage of Australians scoring at least 3 or more, that's what the criteria was, I guess, for a pass, was to get 3 or more correct, was 63% of men and 48% of women. Now that's a significant difference between the two groups. Teenage girls also scored lower than teenage boys, but that difference was not significant, statistically significant, but the difference between teenagers and adults was quite significant. So it would seem that some of it's clear from above that the gender gap in financial literacy in adulthood stems from its beginning in teenage years. So understanding the determinants of financial literacy for young people who are sort of around 15 to 17-year-olds is really important. Now, I'm going to talk briefly about that sort of younger age group. On different surveys, so this is the Hilda survey, but there's an OECD survey called PISA. So it's international. And Australia, it looks at school-based financial education that boys and girls should generally receive. And I find it quite confounding and a bit confusing. On different years, there's different levels, different gender differences. So, for example, the international results for 2018 found that boys scored higher than girls on financial literacy when controlling for variables such as reading and maths. Girls were doing better on reading, boys were doing better on maths in that particular instance. They state this was the same as the 2012 test, but it was different than 2015 when girls scored higher on financial literacy. Also, girls in Australia were scoring slightly lower on the maths element, but there were no other, there was at that point, and I've been trying to keep my eye on for the Australian results, there hasn't been any more information. I think on these sorts of tests, the jury is kind of out, and we probably need to look at some more sociological type of information to fill in what we think's happening and look at it from a gender point of view. And that's what we'll do next. But I think it's interesting, but I don't think every result you see, you can completely say, this is the truth. It's the truth on that test at that point in time. Kind of what you were saying, Laura. So what do you think is the difference between male and female financial literacy? Has anybody got any thoughts on it?
I think one thing that you raised that's interesting is the reading versus maths, and the fact that from a young age children are socialised based on their gender to take an interest in different subjects and skills. So girls and women tend towards the soft sciences, English, history, sociology and things like psychology. Men tend towards the STEM subjects, and those subjects maybe lend themselves more to understanding numbers, maths, financial concepts, and perhaps it's also the way that parents talk to their children about some of these things as well, because surely like a lot of attitudes towards money and things stem from parents' relationship with children and how they convey that. So yeah, not sure.
That's great. Yep, you've certainly covered off on what I was going to talk about, Laura. Anybody else have anything else they want to add? Otherwise, I'll move on. Hi, Christine's shown her camera.
Hello, I'm sorry, I had 11 o'clock in my head.
Oh, that's all right. You've only missed all the intro stuff. We've just been talking about financial literacy. Let's talk a bit about the second point you made, Laura, which is really important. So there's a range of different research now that suggests that girls and boys are both taught about budgeting and saving. Girls often report that's from their mother, but boys are significantly more likely than girls to be given information on creating wealth. So that would be tax, share market, investment, credit ratings, that sort of thing. It's usually by their fathers. Girls also report if they get that information, it's usually from their fathers. This is changing slightly with younger, with younger women now, girls reflecting now, or young women reflecting now on what they learned, certainly from my generation. However, there's still definitely that gendered pattern now. The other thing is that, and this was from the PISA survey I spoke about a moment ago, and another couple of surveys as well. I get them all mixed up, but they're all there somewhere in the folders, which I'll talk about later. Girls work more outside of the home in teenage years, and they'll tend to have jobs in retail or babysitting. Boys they work less paid work, and they work in family businesses often, that sort of thing. Now, the other really interesting and disturbing thing is that, and this is very current from the Kids Contribute survey, which was a massive survey done, I think, just a couple of years ago, that girls actually receive less pocket money than boys, even though we know they are doing more of the unpaid work at home as well as the paid work outside the home. So that unpaid work is often looking after their siblings. So there's, a big part of the story, I guess. What we also know is that some groups of girls and young women feel less confident about their skills around money, and obviously potentially around investing if they're not hearing about it. And there's a lot of research that suggests girls, and young women feel more overwhelmed and that sort of thing. The CBA's own research found that actually half of all women did feel very confident and in control of their money. And that's very much the angle they have in all of their financial sort of empowerment, independence literature on their website, which is great. So it's really it's about sort of taking that strengths-based approach that women are just as confident as men. Having said that, it was about half, and that was about 3,700 customers. So that's a reasonable sample size. So we're going to explore this a little bit more when we move on to the first sort of fact sheet area, which is young women in their 20s. So what I've chosen to do with this is just take the 4 main fact sheets and highlight some of the interesting things in each. We'll just have a chat about each of those points. So with this group, we know that 18 to 25, probably in terms of financial difficulties, credit cards are going to be the issue. It's not an issue for all young women. A lot of young women are really clear on the challenges of having a credit card and often refuse to have one, or will have their limit put down. But a lot of young women, particularly in reports from sort of the last 5 to 10 years, saying the banks are always writing, wanting to give me increased credit limits. I hope that's going to be changing over time. But generally, if young women had credit cards and were in debt, they didn't really understand what the interest rate was. They didn't check their account balances, and they often used it for, consumables like clothes, travel, lifestyle needs. And they found it quite easy to get the credit. And once in debt, they really didn't know how to pay it off, and they often ignored it. So some young women in this age group also report finding their finances boring and are disengaged. And that figure comes from CBA's research. They've actually done quite a lot of research. I'm going to be honest, I didn't look at a lot of ANZ. There's certainly ANZ research. There's some NAB, I think. I didn't look at it because I was not going to be able to reference it in a CBA document. So that there is data out there. Around 30% of women under 35 found their finances boring. I mean, I'm 56. I find my finances boring at times. So there's a continuing pattern from those teenage years with young women saying they feel overwhelmed, embarrassed, or stressed by their finances. These are common feelings that women talk about throughout different age groups. And the CBA's research found 56% of women under 24 years old said that in particular. Now, there are plenty of young women who are really planning for the future. It's more than just saving for the moment. It's looking at where they want to be longer term. And the ABS data in the last few years has shown that young women are, in fact, buying their first homes at higher rates than young men. So that's been a really big difference. Whether that's with support from parents, saving deposits, I'm not exactly sure, but they're certainly taking that initiative, securing their future independently too, not with a partner. So financial abuse does happen. Oh yes, Laura, is that a clap? You're just really happy about that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm really happy about that too, Laura. I think everybody should be clapping for that. That's awesome. Okay, so financial abuse is happening, but at a lower rate than it will happen in other age groups. There's very limited report, information around stats in financial abuse. But the one report I did find that seemed reasonably trustworthy was that 9.7% of women compared to 4.7% of young men would experience financial abuse in that sort of under 25-year-old age group.
And I was just going to ask, is that always from partners, or is there potential for that to happen from parents or another kind of authority type figure?
It can be very likely to happen with flatmates. So it's not always intimate partners, but it's definitely likely with being left with debt of other people and accepting that and not understanding that they didn't have to do that. So there's some of that.
Wow.
The most common forms are having your property stolen or destroyed, so in a breakup, maybe somebody destroying something of yours, and having debts accrued that you are then responsible for, often like, in house sharing situations. It is.
Sorry, Annette, does this
Yep.
include catfishing? So online sort of dating and all that sort of stuff and people asking for money and...
Didn't see anything about that, but that's really interesting. I wasn't looking for it though, but I didn't see anything about that. I'm sure it happens. So there's definitely underreporting in this area, and when some of the qualitative research I saw suggested that for young women, it was maybe not necessarily seeing it as financial abuse, but seeing that they loved that person so much and they were just really overly generous. It took some time to process it and see it as abuse. That would be true of every age group, but I think for young women there was that particularly, less experience maybe with relationships. So feeling like, and possibly blaming themselves a little bit, like, that was my fault or I was just too kind and too generous. So often being surprised to learn it is financial abuse. Now, I'm going to give you what I think are some good resources for this age group. Now, these aren't ones I've necessarily, well, the second one isn't one that I've recommended publicly because it's a book. And, we tried to recommend government resources and community resources to people. However, the Lady Talks Money website is really good. It is two young women who are involved in, they have kind of financial consultancy type companies, but this particular website is not about them selling anything. It's about them educating women about finance. And it just happens that they're young and that they're really on top of it and they're very engaging and they have great conversations with each other and do little sort of videos. So I would highly recommend that one. They're not asking you to buy anything. The other one that I personally really like, and I think it's great, is Budgets Don't Work, But This Does by Melissa Brown. The reason I really like that is it gets you starting to think and reflect on your own money story and how it's formed and how you relate to other people around money. And of course, the Money Talks Young Women webinar with Rachel and Pariti Jane was really fantastic, and I'd highly recommend that. Once that should be going up on the website, or is up on the website, and we'll have the link for that shortly, and you'll be able to refer people to that because it was really great. My hot tip for this age group is uncover your money story and talk to others. So I think that's important for all of us, but if you can do that earlier in life, really understand exactly what's influenced you and how you've maybe got your ideas about money, you'll be in a better position to make good financial decisions for yourself, but you'll also hopefully learn to talk to others. And this is the age where you want to give people, young women, confidence to talk to other people about money. And I think the Wire resource, which is, there's so many ones with similar names, but Women Talking Money. Yes, Talking Money? Yeah, Talking Money. Anyway, that one, which is referenced in all the fact sheets, is a really good place to start. I believe they're updating it at the moment, but it's a really great resource. And it takes people through a process, again, of understanding how they view money, but how they will then talk to a partner or a friend or whoever about money. So that would be my tip. Women during the parenting years. So we start with the three big ones: the gender pay gap, the workforce participation pay gap, and the super pay gap. Now, I know you probably all know about those big three, and I know we don't necessarily always want to call them gaps, but for shorthand, I'm going to present it this way. These are the structural barriers to women's financial independence. So workforce participation gap, really comes into play at this point in your life because it's casual and part-time work. Women are moving increasingly to side hustles and self-employment when they're having kids, which often means no super. The super pay gap really starts to widen in this age group of, when you have children and you leave the workforce, that's where that gap commences. Well, it doesn't commence, but it certainly gets exacerbated. I don't think I need to labour those points because I think everybody here would be across all of those. Women still reporting overwhelm, stress and a lack of confidence in this period of their life. And the major reasons are time poor. because you're managing, and this is sort of what Laura was talking about before, daily finances and savings are a big focus still of women in households. Research shows that there's less, I don't know whether it's opportunity, but there's less involvement and confidence with household investments. So that might be conversations around super, or where money gets invested in shares. But certainly you can understand, and all of you that have children or in that point in your life well understand that there's a real tendency to put other people before yourself and not to prioritise your own financial, journey, the things you want to do for yourself to be financially stable. It's usually about the family. Men tend to say that they are more focused on that and interested in that.
Sorry, Annette, can I also, just from my experience too, there's also that, I don't know, it's this ingrained feeling that you're not actually contributing to the income because you're looking after the kids. So you don't have any spare income to purchase things for yourself. It's all got to go on, the family. It's
100%. That comes up a lot. Yeah, for sure. Look, the really good thing is that women make great investors, and there's recent research out from a couple of different firms, but this one's been quoted a lot. Fidelity Investments did really big scale research. They found that women's investments on an annual basis outperform men's by 0.4%. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but if you multiply that over every year for a 25-year-old woman till retirement, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. You're talking about a lot of money.
What sort of investments are they, Annette?
Shares. Yeah. So I'm going to read you a bit from this report. Even more revealing about general attitudes is, Fidelity discovered that women not only save more than men, 0.4% more than men, they also, their investments earned that 0.4% as well. So it was both saving and investment. But even more revealing about general attitudes is Fidelity's companion, the second survey they did called Women and Money, which asked participants which gender was better at investing money. The outcome was 9% of people said women. And what is it that so that's just shocking. Women were actually doing it, but yeah, clearly we're not being given credit for that. What is it exactly that makes women better investors? One factor Fidelity said is that men are 35% more likely to make trades, which means that trading fees eat away at their portfolios more than they do women's. Women also save more in the first place, almost a full percentage point annually in workplace 401ks, which is super, and individual vehicles such as IRAs and brokerage accounts. Another advantage was that women assume less risk, so they're not loading up entirely on equities. They also invest in more vehicles like target date funds, whose automatic allocations make for smarter diversification. So that's really good news. And there's, like I said, there's at least one other financial company that was giving the same sorts of results. So financial abuse occurs in this age range as well, obviously. It kind of peaks in that 40 to 49 year bracket. And this is the stat where we know around 16% of women will experience financial abuse, although obviously if you're experiencing family violence, it's a lot higher for you, the risk of it. I'm thinking the end of that probably has to do with potentially divorces as well. Things could be coming up with that in that kind of age range, where we talked about earlier, a form of financial abuse can be at separation, discovering the abuse that's occurred. You may not have been aware of it during the relationship, so it could have been hiding assets or loans or other debts in your name.
Annette, can I just ask for the during the parenting years when people are often in couples, do people within couples talk about their finances? Do people initiate those kind of discussions, or do we have data on that?
Look, there would be tons of data on that. I haven't necessarily looked at it, but from my reading in the area, if you are more likely to have those discussions, you are definitely more likely to reduce the incidence of family abuse and to have a better kind of financial future. So certainly everything says that that discussion is critical and to be on the same page. But there are just difficulties in doing that, obviously, for a lot of people. So great resources, I think, for this age group are online communities and websites. And, you know, often a lot of women in this age range may be on Facebook or other social media. So the ones that I personally like and benefit from are Women with Sense. Now, that's Natasha Jansen, who we did 2 of the Money Talk sessions with. She did the one on investment with me and the one on money mindsets. So Natasha has 2 different Facebook communities, and the sort of private one, which I think you can get if you just agree to get a newsletter from her, regularly has things like comparing phone things, but she also puts a lot of really great gender analysis type stuff on her page, but practical stuff as well. Like there was one on groceries, and I just realised how my grocery bill was too high. The Money Bar is another one, and that is Melissa Brown, who I spoke about before. That's one of her pages. And the Financial Feminist. I haven't been able to find out much about her, but she puts a lot of really interesting kind of gendered analysis of finance. They're all Facebook pages. So that's just some examples. And my top tip, make extra contributions to your super. And we'll talk a bit more about the impact that can have when we get to women in super. Okay, so women approaching retirement. Saving for retirement in Australia is the second largest personal concern after climate change. So it's the thing that people worry about, and it keeps them awake at night. There's 2 different studies that I'm referring to here. So the first one about the saving for retirement worry was 50,000 Australians, and that was the Australia Talk survey. This second one, the degree of worry, 47% higher for women over 50 than it was for men. That was really interesting. That's a great report. It's called Retirement Income Worry, Who Worries and Why. And this stat here is really around, they controlled for a number of variables, and what was really left was concern over the caring duties in that age group, and concern about outliving partners were the contributing factors to that worry about not having enough money in retirement. Interestingly, worry drops significantly once you're retired, because you just know where you are and you get used to that. Superannuation is the looming issue worrying women mostly in terms of retirement. So there's a few different stats around at the moment with different amounts of super. This one is from ABS a couple of years ago. But women retire with 121k compared to 168k for men. The other worrying thing is that in that age range, 60 to 64 years, 23% of women don't have any super compared to 13% of men. And that's not surprising in the sense that in this age group, a lot of women would not have were working before the superannuation guarantee came in 1992. So women my age and older were potentially working without super. Next one. And obviously in this age group, life events, so, you know, they can have really entrenched some financial disadvantage. So divorce, family violence, and I think you're probably all across that stat about the increased risk of first-time homelessness for women over 50 is really kicking in. And that's excuse me, a kind of a much bigger issue that would take a whole session in itself to discuss. On the upside, and writing this fact sheet, it was a bit like, oh, you know, what are we going to say, really? I felt like one of the most positive things was to really look at that worry and consider how do you get around that? And obviously I'm just not thinking about that. A lot of women, my age group and older are. And so some women are really and there's evidence that women are really starting to look at non-traditional living arrangements. More of them are looking at downsizing, private share accommodation, home share and co-housing. So I'll just quickly talk about those. So downsizing to a smaller home or unit is often a way that you can clear debt early. In fact, it's pretty much what we've done here. We deliberately downsized to a much smaller home. You don't have to wait until you're 75 to do that. It lets you build up savings. It can occur before you retire, and there's actually incentives for downsizing in that if you're a certain age in a certain bracket, you can put some of that money into your super. And the ATO has information on that. Home sharing involves renting a home with somebody else. It's become really popular as women age because there's obviously financial benefits. You can organise it yourself, or you can look at government programs like this home share, which is a government way of assisting you to share. That's for older women and people with disabilities. Co-housing is a form of home ownership where you can buy into a community or you can build a home with a community. It's an alternative to the traditional nursing home, and it allows women and partners to come together and usually around a shared interest or intention, and then they can share costs and age in place and share costs around, all sorts of things. Oh, everything came at once. So great resources for this group. I think the Money Talk Super and Retirement webinar that we did with Sue West was really good, and I think a few of us have been lucky enough to have Sue's wisdom in the session that she did for our staff. And it was a really good session, so that's something you can point people to. The Money Smart Retirement Calculator is fantastic. There's a few calculators on the Money Smart website that seriously are so good. That is one of them. It really lets you sit down and figure out exactly what you need to retire. And the top tips are clear debt and trial living on your retirement income before you retire. And that often will take the worry out of what's ahead if you can do that. Okay, so it's a little bit similar, but I've pulled out the differences. So women in superannuation. This is a big one, and this is one we know where we're extremely disadvantaged financially. So super supports our retirement through the magic of compound interest. So compound interest is the interest you get on your savings and the interest, and it compounds each year, and that's how you magically end up with a lot more money. And it really works through having that money there for a long time. So an example of that is a woman at 25 contributes an extra $200 to her super a month. By the age 65, she will have deposited $98,000, but has a balance of over an extra $425,000 due to compound interest. Now that's assuming an interest rate of 6%. Makes a really big difference. Yes, Laura. I know, it's pretty stunning, isn't it? But obviously that's 40 years of at 6%, which may or may not happen, and life will get in the road and you'll have years out. But if there was the ability to do that, clearly that's the best way to guarantee your super fund. Okay, so of course we didn't really mention this in the fact sheets too much, but we can't really talk about it today without mentioning the big withdrawals from under COVID hardship. You could withdraw up to 2 lots of $10,000. Ilion, Credit Simple have done quite a lot of analysis. They have access to, I'm assuming in a de-aggregated way, de-identified way. They have access to bank accounts and they can see where people are spending money, and a lot of it has been spent on discretionary. About 64% has gone on discretionary spending. And there were gender differences in that. I'm not going to talk about that so much today, but there's interesting stuff out there about that if you look up Credit Simple. The main thing is really that, and I've looked at Hester. Hester's done a bit of analysis of their super fund. Members aged between 18 and 24 have withdrawn on average a massive 78% of their super accounts, leaving them with average balances of $1,050. The next age group, those between 25 and 39, have rated their balances by an average of 68%, leaving them with an average balance of only $3,609. And Hester said 78.5% of this was from women. I don't like the language rated, because I think there's a sense that, you know, people need to do what they need to do. There's been people that have had to do this. Having said that, there is also, unfortunately, the way it was administered, we know that a considerable number of people withdrew their super even though they were not eligible to do so. They didn't have financial hardship. So that's a real pity. And some other research, the ASFA, which is the Australian Super Fund of Australia, Association of Super Funds, they released some research in August that showed the cost of retirement for a typical 25-year-old woman who accessed $20,000 in early release super could be as much as $85,000 if she was unable to secure employment and contribute super for 2 years. So, and CanStar has also shown long-term costs for accessing super early, with a 25-year-old who had $20,000 in super anticipated to lose up to $102,000 by retirement if they've withdrawn the full amount as part of the scheme. Again, you know, that's interesting for us to know, but I still just want to stress, I think there's young people that have had to do that. And I think for some young people, it is very hard to imagine that this is something they'll ever even have in the future with the state of the world. So, okay, so we know with super, time away for child raising has a large impact. 5 years away from work, say for 29 to 34, could shave $100,000 off your retirement savings. So that's something that women specifically have to deal with. There's lots of other barriers for women, and those are things like the fact the super guarantee, the threshold is $450 per month with one employer. A lot of women will have casual jobs, 3 or 4 employers potentially, and they may not reach the $450, so they may not get super. Women also earn, on average, they earn less, the gender pay gap, so they accrue less super. And older women, again, as I mentioned before, are going to be disadvantaged by the fact that they were working, this will also apply to men, but they were working in a period of time where the superannuation wasn't as available. Okay. And now engagement with super is an issue for men and women generally. It's not just for women, because the super system is complex and it changes constantly. So the ASFA found that 1/3 of Australians don't open any emails or letters from their super fund, and 26% have no idea of their balance, and 44% didn't know what sort of insurance they had. So it is an issue for everybody, but it is heightened for women for some of those reasons we've talked about before. The good news is, and this is really important, is you may not need as much super as you think, and particularly as much as articles tell you need to retire. You know, the idea you have to have $1 million in super to retire. I've looked at figures recently. I looked at them yesterday just to double check. 500,000 for a couple, potentially you can have quite a comfortable lifestyle. It's always going to be dependent on your spending and, you know, how you live your life. And there's a certain kind of elegance, I think, in that idea of scaling back anyway as you head towards retirement, and maybe look at what does that feel like and how would you find that. But a lot of the kind of shock stuff that's out there, I think it does increase everybody's anxiety around money. And of course, the good news is there's ranges of options within super. There's salary sacrificing, transition to retirement for older women, super splitting with spouses or partners. So there are ways to use super to your benefit as well. The resources I think are really good in this area are Money Talks Super and Retirement webinar again, and the Money Smart Super resources. So yeah, the Money Smart website has some really great ones, and this super contributions helps you look at what will happen if you put a bit of extra super in over a period of time. So it's a good one to play with. The top tip is look for your lost super accounts and consolidate. So, you know, if you're in your 30s, 40s, you're working since a teenager, you potentially got a few different super accounts. You may have forgotten about them. You can go onto the ATO website, find that, and yeah, find that missing money. It's a 5-minute easy win. Okay, so where our resources are placed are, just so that you know where to look for some of this information I'm talking about. The Money Talks landing page on the website has the webinars, so the 5 webinars that were done as part of the Manningham Money Talks series. It has some of the fact sheets that Rachel prepared and I prepared later. It has links to all the different resources that we referred to across the Money Talks sessions. So just waiting to get, I think, some final address link site for that, and then we'll be good to go. So that will be something that people can refer people to. The CBA project folder is under gender equality. It's called CBA Women's Financial Independence, I think. It has the draft and final fact sheets. Now, I just need to state that that material cannot be copied and used directly because it does belong to the CBA. That's correct, isn't it, Christine? We can alter it and use it, but you're muted, Christine.
I'm not sure. I'll have a look at the contract. I thought we had an ability to use it as well.
Do we? Okay.
I'll check the contract.
Yeah. Until Christine knows that, though, it's probably best just to, I don't think anybody's going to race off today and do it, but just to leave the final fact sheets, you know, not to pull direct information from that. Having said that, the CBA is extremely likely to change everything that's written anyway, so it probably isn't going to be a big problem. There's also a lot of the reports I speak to are filed in there. There's fairly logical categories. You'll go in and you'll see tons of reports. Occasionally there'll be like a resource sheet where I might have some of my scrawlings in preparation for a fact sheet. Some of that might be useful, so I've left it in there. Yeah, so hopefully that will be something that you can all look at and use at various points. So my question, how do we create financial independence for women? I think these are thoughts I've had, and I want to hear from you too. All the structural issues related to gender, basically everything Women's Health East does is about this. And you can see from what we've talked about today that there's a lot of structural barriers for women to really gain financial independence. But I think the other part of this story is much more personal and individual, and it's supporting women to build confidence and knowledge with accessible financial education targeted around specific issues and life stages. Certainly on all the information I've read, women have said they want information that's timely, they want it in digestible pieces, and they want it, you know, almost in that 24-hour, I can grab it when I've got a minute, you know. So often web-based stuff is useful. It's not the total answer. Obviously, we all learn in different ways, and for a lot of women, it will be getting together and talking. And what I've really noticed that's been happening during COVID is the discussions around money have increased, and there's a lot more resources around money coming out because people understand that this is what we need at this point in time. So did anybody have any other thoughts about that, how we create financial independence for women?
I think.
I don't really.
Sorry, you go, AP.
Oh, I was not really an answer, but I agree with you, Annette. I think discussions around this topic have increased with the onset of COVID. And I feel like it's a kind of a popular, if you will, and palatable topic. So I think for us, it's also about thinking about how we can use this as a vehicle for our strategic priorities, even though this is encompassed in our strategic priorities, but some of the ones that aren't as, I use the word popular for lack of a better word, but how we can use this, which is getting a lot of response at the moment, is getting a lot of attention, like how we can kind of use that to progress our other priority areas, if that makes sense.
Yeah, leverage off it. That makes a lot of sense because it is really popular at the moment.
Yeah.
Does anybody else? I've got another question to ask on another slide, but somebody else wanted to have something to say?
I think that's correct in saying that all of our priorities are linked to financial and economic equality for women. And I think that one thing is linking it to the work around gender stereotypes and challenging those from a young age to encourage more women to take an interest in issues that relate to them. So not seeing their space as being the social sciences or so-called soft skills, but being across the whatever. And I think another thing, and I guess because SRH is my passion or whatever, that like advocating for women to have reproductive control, because the thing about women losing so much super capacity and also financial equity with their partner or whatever is really alarming to me during the parenting years. So I think ensuring that women have the right to choose when and if they have children and how many, and the planning and space between them, and also seeing that work as valued. So like changing some of the, norms and attitudes around some of that work to see it as equal as paid labour.
Yeah, it's very true, Laura. I think that probably the stat that I found the most alarming of all of the different things I read was the pocket money one, because these are potentially women that I know with 5 to 10 year olds, my daughter-in-laws potentially. So I found that really
that links to valuing work too, because sometimes is that me? Sorry. That we value the boys' jobs more than the girls' jobs, sort of stuff, that because they're doing, I don't know, gardening or putting the bin out or something rather than doing the dishes, or so it's also linked to that valuing of men, what's perceived as men's work more than women's work, boys
absolutely.
and girls.
And I think it's getting better too. Like I know when I went on parental leave, I got nothing, like no payments, nothing. Like I think I got $1,000 from the government, and so it was hard. But also, I think role models are really important, and I think I hope that's changing. So if you've got really good role models for young women out there, and they can see the benefit of investing and savings and being smart with their money.
Absolutely. Well, unless anybody had anything else on this question, I'm just going to scroll through to the... Oh, you do, Vega? Yeah, go on. Sorry, we can't hear you. Might be something to do with your mic or...
I'm unmuted, but let's
Okay.
see. Is that better? Yeah.
That is better, yeah.
So might be a question on notice if it doesn't fit in here, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the issues when you did the research for the Women with Disabilities fact sheet, and what were the issues that emerged there that were about the added intersections of disadvantage for women with disabilities across their life stages.
Yeah, we looked at it. It took quite a different format than all the other fact sheets. It was specifically on women with disability and financial abuse. So specifically looking at how family violence but financial abuse in the context of family violence played out for women with disability. So there were additional ways in which women experience family violence as a result of their disability, and they were around denial of, it could be denial of access to their communication aids or their mobility aids. Certainly we know that women with disability experience family violence and sexual assault at a much higher rate than other women. And it looks like from some of the research as well that women will experience financial abuse at a higher rate because of having a disability. So in the folders in that area of the CBA Financial Independence Project, there is one on women with disability. I didn't talk about it today because it was slightly different than some of the other things, and also because I'm waiting to hear back from the Commonwealth Bank and see where we land on what's actually in it. But it's coming from a different point of view. It's very much focused around financial abuse. The ways in terms of financial abuse that women with disability experience it was particularly the guardianship and trustee issues. So being controlled financially that way, not having access to their finances, sometimes because of issues related to their disability, like cognition. So people taking advantage of that, maybe taking your card and going off and using it. And there was a lot of, I suppose, additional factors that really came into play. Then in terms of accessing information, there were some difficulties too. And I note now that 1-800-RESPECT has done a whole lot of work around disability, and so they have an app. They helped put the Sunny app together. They have videos on how to access their service, the caption, and they've really done a lot of work, which is really good, because certainly some of the older research I read where that was not the case, you could see that it's very difficult if you go to a disability service. They're just like, well, we don't know what to do about this other stuff. If you go to a family violence service, it'd be like, well, we don't really know how to meet your needs with the disability. So there was that sort of typical problem you always hear about. I think that's improving. What else would I say about it? I think what we tried to do with that fact sheet was put in more of the lived experience. So there are quotes. Those quotes have come from 2 main research reports. I think they kind of bring to life some of the issues that women experience. But certainly, yeah, higher levels of abuse, financial family violence, and in some ways more extreme forms of control used. It's qualitative. I can't really judge that. But yeah, so have a look at the draft sheet. It is draft. It's not final. I hope it will be final today. It may or may not be. We'll see how we go. I haven't heard anything from them this morning. It's not a good sign. But yeah, there's plenty of information that you can refer back to. And yeah. So sorry, Avega, I can't be totally helpful to you, but I hope that's given you some areas to sort of have a look at. Great. But if people don't have anything else, I'll just move to the next question I've got for us to consider. That's okay. Which is, can you see a use for a general training session based on the material we've been gathering? And if so, who should be the target audience and what would you want to see included? So talking to Christine, just about the fact that is all this information that we now have through this project and Money Talks, there's an opportunity to pull some of this together in some form. You're all out in your various settings and hearing what people are saying and what community members and organisations want. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, we just got a request in from one of the neighbourhood houses. What were they looking for?
So they had seen or heard of the Manningham sessions, and were looking for something similar. So it was to deliver to women who didn't necessarily have access to like the technology skills or access to computers, because they were interested to do it face to face. So I'd have to double check, but it was geared towards a particular demographic as well. So I think people are having these ideas with really specific people in mind.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, I found the most interesting thing I found about like this whole presentation, Annette, was, like you said, it really, like a lot of women are confused, even women who are well educated and have progressed in their careers and don't have kids, or yeah, it's not just the people who don't have access necessarily to the internet to get information, you know. Yeah, super interesting.
Yeah, it's actually really, it is really confusing the way it's presented, and certainly a lot of the information that I think young people are given isn't. I don't know right now, this very minute, I couldn't comment on that, but the research reports I've read, you know, in the last 10 years would suggest that it hasn't equipped people to understand the financial environment they're in, where you do have this complex array of products. I mean, just looking at your super statement is completely overwhelming. So, and that's for somebody that, you know, has English as a first language and can logically think through things, but you just look at it and get to the end, you're like, I don't know what to do. So there does need to be some breaking down and simplifying, and like some of those resources I've referred to really do that well, and there are people out there trying to do that, particularly, you know, the women that we all had come on co-present, I think did a great job of breaking down some of those concepts. It's all been made a lot more complicated than it needs to be.
I agree. I think what you presented today, and was really incredibly useful, and you know, that could be something, the basis of something that we could go out to speak about. The thing for me would be, and I found even with some of when we had the speakers, they'd send you to links.
Yeah.
And I think having some practical kind of examples, or where you could actually go, all right, this is what that budget spreadsheet looks like, and this is how you fill it out, sort of thing, would be like a practical kind of component to it. Of course, that would be a longer session, obviously, or more of a workshop. And then for me, it's consideration of which bits. Like I felt like what you presented, we absolutely could present.
Yeah.
You know, you don't need a financial expert to present that stuff, but there might be some, like, to be kind of, oh, what are the bits that we don't want to touch, you know, that we should have someone, and obviously financial advice is we'd need to steer clear of, but I think it would be really valuable to have a little training resource of some sort. Have people got any other ideas about what they want to see in it? So if someone came to us tomorrow and we said, right, who can deliver a session? What would you want? What sort of, you know, resources would you want to be able to hop in and do that?
I think some advice on where to go if you were interested in investing in shares or something like that too. How to go about it, how to get started.
Yeah. So we did the session with Natasha on that, and there were some really good resources that came out of that. So that is on Money Talks. So honestly, a lot of, I think, I understand that for some people that don't have access, this is not helpful to them. But, you know, even if some neighbourhood houses wanted to replay it for a group of women they put together, you know, there's different ways of doing this without necessarily always having people in the room. But yeah, I think in a general session, we could probably expand out into a few topic areas, because obviously we talk a bit about super, because that was the focus of a fact sheet, but you could equally have something on investment, which is the area that we know women are really good at, but often are not doing. So
is that, we had their consent to be able to reuse those for different purposes? Yes,
that is in the folder. They've all signed the forms. Sue Paridi and Natasha did. I don't think the women from legal, like the financial pressure COVID ones, did.
I think maybe one on how to start a conversation with your partner, for people who do have a partner, about managing finances, or even for women who aren't couples, why it's important to have those discussions with people in your life with whom you have some sort of financial interaction, or if you do eventually have a partner, that it's important, like the emphasis, it should be on, you know, making sure that you're kind of financially matched or whatever as well. Maybe because I had a look at one of the websites that you recommended, Annette, and there were a lot of really good prompts about how to have the discussion, like how much credit card debt do you have, asking like, when did you first get a credit card, or stuff like that I think could be really helpful. For younger women, talking to their housemates about how the bills are going to be divided, or whose bank account the rent's going to come out of, etc.
It's one of the kind of the points that it's a skill, like all financial literacy skills, that ability to discuss money, which has just been such a taboo topic for so long. None of us talk about it really. To start to have those conversations is really critical.
Is that what that Wire resource is about? Haven't they got a whole little booklet on how to have a conversation?
Yeah, they've got a series of videos and good question prompts. Is that what you were looking at, Laura, that one?
I think this one might have been on the two women who have like a blog together.
Oh yeah, the young, the Ladies of Money.
Yes, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, they do have some good stuff on there.
And I think reiterating some of the things that you and Sue have raised about your relationship with money, or your money story, I find that a really useful way to conceptualize money, because it is a really emotional topic. It's not just dollars and cents.
Yeah, very much so. There's a lot of shame, guilt, excitement, brings up a range of emotions.
I think that it's just a very small example, but so I'm forever telling people to put money into their super, like just a small amount, $10 a week or something. And of course during COVID, super's not looking so great at the moment, so it's always hard to ever give advice. But I really liked just that use of a figure to really explain the compounding interest thing, because I think a lot of people don't think about that, about the fact that you might just be putting $5, $10 extra in, but what that means in X number of years is actually massive. So I really liked just little practical kind of explanations of things that you used were really helpful, I thought.
Yeah, and of course super actually has bounced back a bit, but that's likely to potentially change again. We don't know what will happen when the American election happens to the markets. Okay, any other points? Otherwise we're...
Annette, is it too basic to suggest how to make a budget, particularly with some of the younger women who maybe don't have as many living expenses as people who are in the parenting or kind of middle life stage? Getting people to understand the different components, that kind of thing.
Yeah, there are good resources for that. I'm not sure if they're in my young women fact sheet. They probably should be. Although the issue with the Commonwealth Bank is that we couldn't refer to any commercial resources, of course, so it was all government or community. There's plenty of ones I'd personally recommend Pocketbook, but there's lots of and the Money Smart website has a good setting up a budget template, but there's quite a few of those around, and I know Paridi in this session with Rachel talked about that quite a bit, about budgets. That's interesting too.
I think in that session it was really good that they connected your budget to also your goals, what do you want to achieve in however many years in the future, and so that informing your budget. I never ever, I still probably don't think in that way. So I was like, whoa, blown away by these young women kind of thinking about linking their finances to their goals. I was like, oh, that's good advice.
It's funny, isn't it? I've learned so many Money 101 things through doing this. I tell you, it's been great.
Just a point on, I don't think we need to go into it, but I guess it's interesting that all of these conversations, the investment stuff always goes to kind of shares, and I think Sue did talk a bit about small business as well. No one ever mentions real estate, which is my core area of investment. But I think just that importance of balancing different types of investment is a kind of key thing, isn't it?
Natasha did talk about different forms of investment in our session. Quite
good. Okay.
And about property. And look, really, she was talking about the fact that you have to be clear about the reasons that you're going to invest in any market and what the pros and cons are. And there's issues. Property's been seen as a really safe thing to do, but there's issues with property just as there is with every other form of investment. So she was very much around risk, reward, and being clear on yourself as a person and what level of stress you're prepared to, live with each class of investment. So look, I feel like there are some really good specific resources there now on the website that could be actively promoted, and that whatever this session is could be more general and referring to some of that, but maybe taking into account some of the things that you've said today. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay, we're all back. I haven't even looked at the chat, but oh yeah. Thanks, that's great. All right, well, I think we can probably end at 11:59. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you found it useful to hear about what I've been rabbiting away at in the background.
Thank you for sharing that. That was fantastic, I think, and great for us to have that to keep drawing on, to know where to find everything. And very good.
Yeah, terrific. All right, I'm going to stop recording.
And we'll see you all in the next hop out and hop back in, hey?
All right, thank you.
Okay, see ya.
Fabulous.